cry havoc, and let wag the dogs of war. Paul Krugman here, another short video take on current events. Last night, the headlines were dominated by reports that the United States might be about to attack Iran. Presumably leaked, not clear whether they're right. Prediction markets say not in the next couple of weeks, but very likely by the end of next month. Prediction markets, what do they know? Well, the answer is we don't know how much insider trading is taking place on those markets. But it certainly is a possible event. Now, it's been somewhat trumped in the news by the arrest of the Andrew, formerly known as Prince, but it's still out there. And I thought I would talk about perhaps the least important aspect of the story, which is the economics. The most important thing is that the President of the United States appears to be considering taking us to war, not only without consulting with Congress, but without even trying to make a case. It's hard to escape the sense that there is some wagging of the dog going on here, that this is an attempt to distract from all his other woes. But in any case, this may happen, it may not. The administration appears to believe that they don't need to worry about the economic fallout from this possible war. After all, the attack on Venezuela didn't have any noticeable economic fallout. Earlier airstrikes against Iran didn't really have noticeable fallout, so maybe this doesn't do anything, and that could be true. But let me give you two reasons why it might not be true. One is that just in itself, mobilizing all those forces in the Gulf area costs a lot of money. And then if we actually start unloading munitions, the munitions cost really a lot of money. The American way of war is extremely expensive, which is not to say that we should not, that we should be using bodies instead of missiles. Of course not. But this is going to be a significant amount of money, even by U.S. standards. And beyond that, well, Iran is an oil-producing country, which matters. Even more important, we don't know, but a war with Iran would pose a threat to exports of oil from the Persian Gulf as a whole, Straits of Hormuz and all that. So there's certainly a reasonable chance that that if this actually does happen, that it's going to raise oil prices. Now, what does that do to the United States? We are, as a nation, in a very different position from where we were during the oil crises of the 70s. We were, in those days, we imported a large share of our oil consumption. We were import dependent and therefore hurt significantly. Our terms of trade were worsened by higher global oil prices. Today, the United States is a net exporter of oil. We import some, but we export more. By the way, that's been true since 2020. That net export position grew under Biden. Never mind what you hear about the Biden administration having been extremely anti-energy. It wasn't. But we are, the United States as a whole experiences a small increase in real income if the price of oil goes up. But I am not the United States as a whole. You are not the United States as a whole. An increase in the price of oil redistributes income to the oil and gas industry away from everyone else. That's most of us, the great majority of Americans, are going to be on the losing end of the economic impact of any increase in oil prices that results from this war. Just as, by the way, recent declines in the price of oil are treated by most Americans as good news because they show up in lower prices at the pump. And the fact that the oil industry, which is, it does a lot of fracking these days, the oil industry is hurt by it, doesn't affect public opinion very much except in certain parts of Texas, basically. So this is a redistribution away from the general public to a relatively narrow industry. And there's something more than that, which is, even if we think about macro income distribution of income between, we go back to basic categories, labor versus capital. the great majority of people get their income from labor with only a little bit of a stake in capital, but the 1%, even more, the 0.1% and the 0.001% and so on, they are heavily dependent on capital as a source of income. So what does an oil price shock do there? Well, quick look at the numbers. Oil and gas is about 0.7% of GDP. Not nearly as big as people think that drill, baby, drill is the secret to economic success would say, but it's, there it is. It's not a minor industry in that sense, but it counts for something like a tenth that much as a share of total employment. And that's because it's extremely capital intensive. Extracting oil and gas involves a lot of capital expenditure, a lot of equipment. What that means in turn is that an oil price shock, if one happens, will favor capital over labor within the U.S. economy. It won't be a huge effect, but it will be an effect, not trivial either. And anything that favors capital over labor, in some ways we're kind of back to a kind of Marxist world. Not that I'm a Marxist, but it is that kind of world. Anything that favors capital over labor is going to increase income inequality. It is going to further favor the incomes of a tiny elite over those of the rest of the country, people who actually work for a living, and not a good thing. Now, again, way behind. The war is not mostly about economic impacts and taking us to war without any of the normal channels that make that legitimate is a more important issue. But the economics of what may be about to happen aren't great either. Take care.